All right, folks, welcome back to the Roswell UFO Symposium. I am your host, Mike, joined by co-host Shane and co-host Toby. We have a phenomenal guest tonight, the filmmaker James Fox. You might have seen his documentaries, The Phenomenon, which is my favorite UFO documentary and probably the best one ever made. And more recently, he has a new one called The Moment of Contact. I have the link down below. You can check it out. I highly recommend it. And before we get started, if you want to hit the like button, the subscribe button, we would greatly appreciate it. We do our show live on YouTube. Please check out our audio platform stuff too. We have video podcasts on Spotify, and we are also on Apple and all other audio platforms. And just click the Linktree link down below. Like I said, all of our links are down below. You can support Shane, Toby, Wounded Warrior. Everything's on there. So just go check out all those links. But without further ado, welcome on the show, James. How are you?
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Of course.
Hey, thanks for coming, James.
Of course.
This is
Are we gonna talk UFOs or what?
Heck yeah.
Is it UFO or is it UAP? That's always
I
the
know.
question.
Well, yeah. I'm still kind of connected to the old, but yeah.
I'll say this. I like UAP because
it doesn't have the baggage.
Well, it doesn't have the baggage of a material thing, right? Like the phenomena could just be anything. It could be dimensional. It could be metaphysical. It could be anything. But with an object, well, you're talking about material realm stuff, right? So,
I remember Dr. Hynek talking about, the nuts and bolts aspect of the phenomenon, but also the psychic aspect of the phenomenon. So it's a bit of both. So we could say UFO / UAP.
Absolutely. Love it. So your newest documentary, Moment of Contact, what was your inspiration? Like, what got you? Obviously, it's an interesting case. A lot of people have heard about it, but what was the catalyst for you to be like, all right, I'm going all in on this thing?
I never really meant to go all in on this thing. And actually, I think the fact that it took roughly 12 years on and off to make, probably at the end of the day was a bit of a boon for us, because I quite honestly don't even know if the public was ready for it today, and they certainly weren't ready for it 12 years ago. There's a lot more talk within the mainstream behind closed doors about this alleged crashed UFO and live aliens than there is publicly. I think it's a bit of a slippery slope. I myself didn't believe it when I heard about it back in the late 90s. I just thought it was impossible for such an event to have taken place and the whole world not know about it. It just seemed so implausible that I didn't want to waste any time on it. But I reluctantly started to look into it after a trip to Brazil in 2011. Bless his heart, the AJ Javard, the late AJ, invited me to Brazil it was 2011, and at a place called Peruíbe, which is about 4 hours south of Sao Paulo. And right before I went on the trip, I got a phone call from a buddy of mine, this guy Jeff Sagansky. And he's like, "Oh, you're going down to Brazil. You got to look into that Varginha incident." And I was thinking to myself, I heard about that in the late 90s, the one where a UFO allegedly crashed and the aliens survived and they were walking through town. And I said, "Yeah, sure, Jeff, I'll look into it for you." Click. Yeah, no intention of doing that. I'm not going to waste my time. And but while I was in Peruíbe, I at a conference talking about a film I did called "I Know What I Saw" and my general research on the phenomenon. I met some witnesses and some researchers, and that kind of, I guess, piqued my interest. And one of the things I've learned over the years is, don't let that knee-jerk reaction of "there's no way this happened because it's so implausible," get in the way. Try to suspend judgment and at least listen to some of the eyewitness testimony before you're going to draw any conclusions. So, Yeah, and I think I met some people. It piqued my interest, and I went back subsequently 4 times, for about roughly a month each time. And I also had some counterparts, on boots on the ground, and it was an ongoing sort of 12-year thing, tracking down witnesses, tracking down the crash witness, Carlos de Souza, um, other people that were involved, and we tried to squeeze this case into the phenomenon. In fact, I spent quite a bit of time editing I think it's like a 12 or 15-minute segment, and ultimately I deleted that whole scene, and and felt that it warranted an entire documentary on just that case. And so when I finished the phenomenon, I had sort of unfinished business, and that was Varginha. So I decided to go back one more time, see what witnesses we could dig up, and produce an entire documentary on just that case. And that's what we did.
Yeah, the most compelling part of the documentary to me, and not to ruin anything, but was the guy that you took back to like the farm where the craft crashed, and he's like a key, and he's like slapping the ground and he's crying, and it was just a very visceral, emotional response to obviously what was like a paradigm shifting event for this man. So I felt like that was the point of the documentary to me that was like the most compelling.
A lot of people felt that, funny enough, for me, that was a very, very compelling segment. And when we were out at the crash site with Carlos de Souza, the ultralight pilot and history professor, professor, um, he wasn't he couldn't find the spot. And even though that's an edited down sequence in the film, we were out there for a couple of hours, and I kept thinking, like, how does this guy, 26 years ago, have this incredible encounter with allegedly a crashed UFO, not know where it happened? And I was incredibly discouraged the first couple of hours. And I thought, we're early in production. This guy can't even find the crash site. And and then he kept saying there was a White House, I said, how certain were you that you could see this White House at the debris field? And he was like, 1,000%. I could see the small white house. And so I took my drone, and it was 26 years, and trees had grown, and I flew my drone over the area one final time and found this little white house that was now 26 years later blocked by a series of trees. And we ran down to that area, and that's when Carlos realized that was the site, and that was quite an emotional moment of the film.
Did you, James, did you run into I guess, much or a lot of pushback by local authorities? And then did you run into any by the United States authorities for trying to do what you do, and especially this documentary?
Um, so on the U.S. side, it's been complete silence, and I've been putting some feelers out there recently, trying to, as I know there. In fact, I didn't realize this for about a decade. Sorry, I keep trying to keep that light behind me blocked so I don't have to. Which way is it here? There we go. Sorry.
I can crop. Just keep talking.
No,
I'll try and
I know
okay.
it's slightly disruptive to the visual.
All right.
I didn't realize the Americans' involvement with the case until the last trip. And every military guy that I spoke to was like, yeah, the Americans came in and took the bodies, and probably took the debris from the crashed object. And and while we were in Brazil, the last trip, I think it was 2021, the end of 2021, um, one of the control flight officers, somebody who monitors all the airspace in a particular area of Brazil, came forward for the first time and described this. He kept saying USAF, United States Air Force plane that flew in unauthorized from the Brazilian government and landed in Campinas. And we had just gotten firsthand eyewitness testimony from a military officer who worked at ESA military base, who drove the creature to Campinas. So we were pretty confident that that's where the creature ended up. And then we have, right at the same time, confirmation from one of the radar control officers that a United States airplane flew in unauthorized from the U.S. from the Brazilian authorities that landed in Campinas, and that helicopters came out and they went to Varginha and all this stuff. So it was pretty compelling testimony that the U.S. were involved, but we haven't, as of yet, and this is an ongoing investigation, had any American authorities come forward and confirm their operations there.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Two things that I found like a part of your filmmaking that I felt was like kind of similar to the phenomenon was the part where you're showing all the Brazilian sightings and like important cases. That kind of reminded me of when you were doing the thing in the phenomenon with the nuclear testing and weapons, like you just show the visual. And I thought like both of those were very compelling in the same way, if that makes sense.
That was kind of an afterthought because we were in the edit room. I guess I kind of knew there was some sort of connection with UFOs and nukes, but we were in the edit room, and my partner, this guy Lance Mungia at the time, was like, "Hey, we were going through these archive testimonials, newspaper clippings, radio interviews from like the 50s and 60s," and he was like, "Hey, let's get a map and let's put pins in the map of these other sightings and kind of get a visual on it." And we did. And we suddenly came to the realization that the proximity to Trinity Site, which is the first detonation of an atomic bomb back in 1945, was remarkable. It was like even Socorro, New Mexico in 1964, and White Sands, testing range, and Holloman Air Force Base was all around. And so the seed was planted. And then when I met with former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid regarding ATIP, I asked him sort of, it was kind of a side note while we were doing a quick B-roll shot of walk and talk for an establishing shot. I figured I might as well take advantage of this moment I have with the senator. What was one of the more astonishing aspects of the phenomenon that you uncovered during ATIP? And to my astonishment, he immediately, without hesitation, said the connection between UFOs and nukes and the interest that they have in our nuclear capabilities and these military installations. So we went back to the drawing board. Yeah, we went back to the drawing board. We contacted Robert Hastings, and we spent probably the better part of a year doing that segment of the film.
Yeah, I've been taking a dive through the Roswell Daily Record archives, and starting in the 40s, up to the 50s and 60s, where the nuclear testing was going on. The sightings line up exactly like you're saying. Anywhere there was nuclear testing activity or research, there were people seeing these discs, as they called them back then. So
yeah, it was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, they called it the Summer of Saucers in '47.
Yeah, it was almost, it was undeniable. It was like there had to be a connection. It couldn't be a coincidence, And so obviously Robert Hastings has done, exhaustive research on this. And there were a lot of other cases that we were unable to cover. One of them was Minot. I think they call it Minot Air Force Base. I think it was 66, but don't quote me on that. That was a really extraordinary encounter with the landing while there were guys working on a remote, I guess it would have been a nuclear tipped missile during the peak of the Cold War. And that story in particular didn't make it in the film, that one, but there were a lot of very compelling firsthand eyewitness testimony about some of our more guarded military installations housing nuclear weapons that had these encounters.
Did you feel the need to do something maybe a little bit more, like take a little bit more of a chance? Because like the phenomenon, like I said, is my favorite UFO documentary. It's a very like epistemological approach to what we know. Like you're taking a look at like what's all the evidence, this is what we actually know, and just lay it out there almost, and you do it almost in like a chronological order, right? I mean, obviously you mix in different things, but yeah, you kind of go from like the oldest sightings and cases and start working your way up. This new one, obviously, as you mentioned, there's a lot of evidence for these things, these beings and the crash and everything like that, but it's not as, I would say, steeped in American, the American zeitgeist, if you will, meaning that not many people have probably heard about this case that are into UFOs.
I knew that it was a little bit of a risk in terms of my reputation. I With the phenomenon, I developed a fairly mainstream reputation. I had the endorsements of former CIA people, former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I was getting all these quotes in support of the film, and quite honestly, I felt like I was pushing the envelope a little bit there because we dealt with alleged landing cases in Close Encounters of the Third Kind and in Africa, and so I pushed it a little bit there, but I felt that I couldn't dismiss the firsthand eyewitness testimony of a foreign case, and it also demonstrates the global nature of the phenomenon. And so I took a bit of a gamble making Moment of Contact, and I thought maybe my reputation would get tarnished a little bit in the short term, but I think that there'd be enough additional testimony that we'd stir up the hornet's nest that would come forward and eventually give more credence to this case. So I went all in on it.
Hey, real quick, James, while you were there, did anyone talk about, I'm going to butcher the name, right? It's a Ubatuba Beach, Brazil incident in
Yeah,
Brazil where I guess apparently there was another body or crash that fell into the sea?
yeah. It was just a debris from an alleged UFO thing. Um, I actually touched on it really discreetly in the phenomenon when I was in the lab with Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée, because Jacques had pieces of that debris that were being analyzed from Gary Nolan, um, and I mention it in Moment of Contact a little bit. We talk about that case and the analysis work that was done because I think that was 1957 Ubatuba. Yeah, we touched on it, and I touched on a number of very compelling cases that took place in Brazil. Brazil's, got some of the best cases. Honestly, I think the Varginha case, if true, is the best case in the history of the phenomenon, certainly in modern history.
What do you
What
think? Sorry, Toby. What do you think as far as like crashes and retrievals? Do you think it's a common occurrence? And I mean, as far as retrievals, we have them there somewhere.
I am not a specialist on crash retrievals. This is kind of new territory for me. I find it. I hate to use the quote from Carl Sagan where he says extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Um, but it is kind of true, particularly in mainstream. If you're gonna make the claim that a UFO crashed and live aliens wandered through a town and were witnessed and captured and ultimately sent back to the U.S., that's a pretty big claim. Uh, can I prove it? No, I can't prove it. Can I make a very compelling case in a court of law and perhaps sway a jury? I think so. I think so. And ultimately, my objective and our objective, the co producers on the project, was to shine a light on this case with the idea that there would be additional firsthand eyewitnesses coming forward, both Brazil and U.S. And we have efforts right now in Brazil to get this film into the hands or into the households of just as many people as we can. And it's an ongoing effort, and we're getting some traction on that. And so I'm very, very enthusiastic and encouraged that there will be more witnesses coming forward. In fact, there already have been some witnesses coming forward, doctors that were involved in the case and that we're following up on. So it's an ongoing investigation.
I guess that begs the question then. A bunch of people asked about. You say there's footage of the creature, correct?
No question. No
Okay.
question.
How is the effort to get that released publicly going?
So I got to be cautious on what I say because I don't want to jeopardize our efforts right now. But let's just say this: we have definitively located two incredibly uh, reliable sources. They did not come to us. We tracked them down. We got confirmation, and we made a very generous reward on the table. And one of them is thinking about it. The other one asked for us to disappear for 6 months, which we did. There was a lot of heat coming on us when, particularly after the Eric Lopes incident, which was the alleged second driver during that capture. The military base was making calls to either people that we had just met with or that we were about to meet with. So we had to kind of let the dust settle and let the whole thing cool off. But it's an ongoing effort. And one of the people that we reached out to said they didn't need the money. And my immediate response was, well, I'm sure the children of Virginia could use that money for education, medical, housing, food. And that sort of got this person to rethink, whether or not they were willing to part with it. But everyone's terrified, so we'll have to see what happens.
Do you think there's more to uncover in this case?
Oh, no question, no question, no question. I'm convinced there's pieces of the craft still in the hands of people in the town. No question.
Is there a part of the case or your documentary that people should particularly pay attention to because you think, as far as your opinion, is super important as far as the phenomenon goes?
I think for me, Military X towards the end. Have you guys all seen it?
Yeah.
The gentleman with the camo hat on at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So pay attention to what he says. There's more to that happening. He's very well connected. He was involved with the transportation of one of the creatures, maybe two of them, but at least one of them. Um, and and there was a screening at the 27th anniversary just recently in the town of Virginia, and I had some of my fellow Brazilian UFO researchers present. I wasn't unfortunately able to be there, and there were new um, connections made at that screening that we're following up on.
Has anybody ever approached you from any of the alphabet agencies or the government based on your skills of making these films and said, why don't you add this, or can you leave this out, or do this? Has there ever been any interactions that made you feel like, there's some sort of, narrative, not control, but just trying to get certain things out there or keep things from being out there, something like that?
I got a letter. I get contacted quite often by people that claim to be in the military, claim to be in the know, and recently I got contacted by someone, and they wanted to send me a personal letter because they were too fearful of transmitting any kind of information over the internet or email or even encrypted or even on Signal. And so there are people that are sending me letters, um, telling me where to follow up on with flight logs and how. So I'm getting constant information. I'm sure that some of it's bogus, and some of it might turn out to be quite helpful. So that's ongoing. It's pretty much, I would say, weekly, if not almost daily.
Yeah, I was just curious because we know of in the past, obviously, people that are skillful in the media have been, approached by different people to do or not do certain things.
Yeah. I give out my email sometimes. I
Yeah.
don't do it often, but I do sometimes. And you never, most of what you get is, but sometimes you get a little golden nugget.
I
got
just
another
get the
question.
Illuminati emailing me. Illuminati6@gmail.com.
So, hey, James. So,
Yes.
as far as, I guess you would say researchers, budding filmmakers, people who are, why do you think it's important for them to take this subject seriously and get more people involved in making documentaries about the cases and all this? Because, like I said, Phenomena, I didn't think I told you this. Phenomena was the very first documentary I saw about the subject. Amazing. So
Oh,
I'm curious, and that's one of the reasons I kind of got into this whole filmmaking thing.
well, I have to respond to that question with a question, and that is, I ask your audience to suspend judgment, as I've often told myself to do, and imagine for a moment if there was tangible evidence to suggest that we're not alone in the universe, and that evidence was being withheld from the general public, me, you, your audience, everybody else. How significant of a story would you give that? And again, I asked him, I'm not saying it's true or it's not true, but if it were, how significant would it be? And I think that the vast majority of people would respond by saying it'd be the biggest story of modern history. And obviously, I'm convinced that it's happening. And so it's a very difficult story to walk away from. People say, like, why do I do what I do? I do what I do because I don't want to sit there screaming from the hilltops, ET has landed. But I think there's something very significant happening, and that those in the know are keeping us out of the loop for whatever reason.
You just made a comment, hard to walk away from. Do you consider it almost? I've seen something, so I consider myself obsessed almost to the point. Do you consider yourself just you want to get the message out there in the way that it convinces the right people?
I don't see how I could walk away from this at this point. I think I tried to walk away for decades, and I kept getting drawn back in, and now I am coming to the realization that this is kind of my journey, while I'm here for this short period of time on this little blue planet, hurling in the vacuum of dark space. I think it ultimately could lead to uh, you know, a revelation of us as a species, of the much larger picture of who we are and where we come from, and how we fit in the larger picture. So I think it's a very, very compelling story. I think it's probably the most compelling. I think it's probably one of the most significant stories of our time, and it's coming out. They can't put the genie back in the bottle, man. This stuff's coming out.
Yeah, I mean, to Shane's point, I think you're the documentarian on the subject that people look to, because, I mean, let's face it, some of the other stuff's either maybe a little too woo, a little too out there, or the production's not great, or whatever the case may be. I mentioned to you off air, we have our first documentary coming out in March at the Roswell UFO Expo, As Within, So Without, From UFOs to DMT. I looked at what you were doing. I'm like, okay, well, we can't do anything military related because the phenomenon's out there, and that's just basically the seminal work of the U.S. timeline of how these things go down. But looking at what you've done, I realized, okay, well, there's other things, other stories that haven't been told, like experiencers, like altered states of consciousness in relation to these things and things like that. So you definitely were an inspiration when I was thinking about doing what I was doing, because I think you hit the nail on the head with the phenomena. I don't know if anybody will be able to do what you did with that in the way that you did that. Do you have any plans to kind of now continue with the UFO topic specifically, or are you going in a different direction, or maybe an offshoot, or like what's your plans going forward?
Well, so this is a personal journey for me, and I just happen to share my personal journey with the general public with my docs, my documentaries. And I have been incredibly frustrated with learning from all these military contacts, in some case civilians, but mostly military, about the definitive piece of evidence, dating even back to Roswell. In the hands of some unknown government agency or subcontractor, who knows? And I am incredibly frustrated, and I want to know where it is and who has the authority to release it. And so I'm launching a new project. In fact, I'll be filming in DC for a full month starting on February 15th. And I want to ask questions on people that are investigating the new task force. I want to find out where this, obviously bring our audience up to speed on what's happened in the last 5-6 years, because a lot's happened, and where the rumblings of all this definitive evidence is, bodies, debris, whatever, and who has the authority to release it. And that's going to be kind of my objective. And it's not just a film idea. It's a natural progression of my research. So that's what I'll be
And
focusing
I
on.
think that's what comes through though too, is like you're just genuine and you can see the integrity in what you're doing, and it's not like, oh, I'm just making a film, or oh, I'm just trying to make money off this topic or whatever. Like I think people can feel that you actually like care, and I think that that's what's important when you're making a documentary, is that you care about what you're talking about, or you're passionate about what you're talking about, so it comes through the film, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really I really do give a shit, if excuse my language, but it matters to me. And I remember thinking, this is such an incredible story. This is so excuse the pun, otherworldly. Uh, um, that if you have to rely on a little bells and whistles and freakish green smoke and creepy sounds, then you're not treating the topic with the level of seriousness it deserves. And if the storyline and the eyewitness testimony can't hold the audience, and you have to rely on this other stuff, then as far as I'm concerned, you're not. I don't want to judge anybody else, but that's something that I think that should be avoided and kind of needs to be avoided.
Oh, I'll judge them. Don't worry about that, James. We'll judge them. You
It's
don't have
such
to
an
do it.
extraordinary story. It shouldn't need all those bells and whistles to hold the attention of the audience.
So
Credibility,
James,
bottom line, credibility.
I'm a member of this org, UAP Med, and it's with Ted Rowe, Deb, a couple people. It's talking about anomalous injuries, right? You were there firsthand, and you saw some of the after effects mentally. And what do you think about that? And don't you think that that's another reason our government should be taking this seriously?
I remember talking. In fact, I'll say who it was, but I remember talking with Jacques Vallée, who's the intellectual heavyweight, probably in the scientific community, on this topic, on the planet. One of them, that's for sure. And I was always so curious as to why anyone would want to cover up what could be the biggest discovery of our time, something that every man, woman, and child is entitled to know, something that is, part of this bigger picture of who we are and how we fit. And why would they cover that up? I just couldn't kind of, come to terms with that. And he said to me very nonchalant, he looked at me and he said, James, he said, think of it this way. The cover up isn't necessarily a question of what they know. It's more of a question of what they don't know. So let's just say that those in the know, they know that these things are real. They know that they're under intelligent control. They know that they're penetrating some of our most secret military installations, flipping and on and off our nuclear weapons, flying around with impunity in our airspace, flying rings around our fastest jets. We've recovered some from alleged crash sites. We don't know who they are, where they come from, or what they want. And no governing body is going to want to relinquish that kind of information for fear of a potential panic or a whirl of worlds or whatever. And that kind of makes sense if you think about, their responsibility, their task with protecting the citizens, what we pay them to do. And for them to come forward and say, look, shall they turn to be hostile? And we're not saying they are, but if they were, we have no visible means of defense against them. We don't know who they are or where they come from, what their agenda is. It could be a little scary. And I just don't see what's in it for them to do that. I mean, when Senator Harry Reid told me he launched ATIP. I don't know what it was initially called.
Mm-hmm.
He said that the level of resistance he got from the intelligence communities was significant. I mean, some people were on the verge of losing their positions. I mean, they were coming down hard. They were digging their heels in and just really, and he pushed and he got it through. Why? Why would that be? Why would you not want, another investigation? And honestly, I don't even know if ATIP was ever intended to be made public. I don't know if Senator Harry Reid, who spearheaded that, ever intended for that program to become public, because it went through the tail end of the Bush administration, all the way through the Obama administration, and the first year of the Trump administration, before a couple of guys decided to find a loophole and walk those tapes out of the Pentagon and onto the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah, that's
Real quick, let me do a follow on to that. So since you were there on the ground, boots on the ground, years later, you saw the after effects, right? Mentally, the changes. I mean, the way people reacted, just trying to relive this, like PTSD, correct? And just these people, these witnesses.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Civilian and military. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Why do you think it seems like the sightings and cases in Brazil have a more, I want to say, like violent angle to them than they are in some other parts of the world? Do you think there's any reason in that region they seem to be affecting people, whether it's injuries or anything like that? It just seems like those encounters are more intense.
Well, the only really weird case that I haven't looked into that extensively is Colares back in 1970s, 77. I think it went on for a year or two. And there were allegedly reports, credible ones, might I add. It's been written up by Jacques Vallée and a number of others, of objects hitting humans being hit by laser beams, some of which survived. I think there were a couple that apparently didn't. That's the only case that I'm aware of where hostility. Usually it's us shooting at them. The girls that came within 8 to 10 feet of this creature, allegedly in Varginha, Brazil, in 1996, January 20th, they said that this creature was feeble and weak and wanting help. It was a non-threatening, and scared and cowering, and they didn't feel threatened at all. UFOs over Brazil, 1986, when they scrambled all the military jets, none of those jets were shot at or damaged or threatened in any way. They did a display in the sky to sort of exhibit their dominance, just like they've done on many other occasions around the world. But in terms of being hostile, I think, look, the level of technology displayed by the phenomenon is light years advanced from anything we have. And so if they wanted to destroy us, I mean, every witness I've talked to, particularly the military ones, said if this thing wanted to destroy me, it would have been like, that hard and that quick. So that doesn't seem to be their intention. Also, another thing that's rather interesting, if you think about it, you don't just look at what the UFO phenomenon or the UAP phenomenon, look at what they do as opposed to what they don't do. I mean, if they wanted to expose their presence overtly, and they've done some pretty compelling things, particularly back in 1997, March 13th, over Arizona, the Phoenix Lights. They've done some pretty overt exposures events, but for the most part, all they'd have to do is hover over Macy's Day Parade in broad daylight, and it would be game over. But they don't do that. So that's, you look at what they do and you look at what they don't do. And that's quite telling.
Yeah, they could either be in some sort of position of evolved control, or they could be in a position where maybe they're from somewhere, we have Earth bias, or we anthropomorphize everything. Could be a scenario where they don't even have, the survival instincts that we do to have to like worry about our surroundings. Maybe they came from somewhere where there's nothing trying to kill them constantly or something like that. So they don't know about that. That could be a possibility too. But somebody has a question from our chat. Godly Moose, excuse me, asks. They haven't seen the movie yet, but they wanted to know: has anybody in the documentary that was part of that, incident, have they had any further sightings, poltergeist activity, premonitions, or any sort of other kind of a thing like that?
I've heard of a few dreams, but I have not heard of anything further than that. Now, with the 1994 Rua, Zimbabwe case, the landing in Rua, Zimbabwe at Ariel School, I think some of the witnesses have had subsequent experiences, but I can't specify exactly who, but I definitely heard that. But in the Virginia case, as far as I know, no. And it's a very different case, too. I mean, the creatures were not in control. They were cowering, they were afraid, they were weak, they were suffering. And they looked a little different too.
They look like a chupacabra or whatever a chupacabra is.
Do you think it was being searched for?
Oh, no question. No question. In fact, we realized that we interviewed a family in the film, and actually some people in the town of Virginia that we went down to the town square because, my whole idea was, hey, if this happened, go downtown to the town square and start talking to random, citizens and find out what, and to my, well, I kind of figured that was going to be the case, but there were a lot of people, I would say 30% of the people we asked that had a piece of the puzzle. And there were people that had described late into the night during that period, disc-shaped craft that were, quote, looking for something. And I kept saying, well, what do you mean they're looking for something? They said they were doing like a flying very low, very slow, and doing a grid search. And I had an entire family talk about it, and I said, well, look, how do you know they're looking for something? They said we watched it for 20 minutes. It was flying over the area. And then we realized the area was where the capture allegedly took place, the encounter with the three girls, Katya, Valkyria, Liliani, that came within 8 to 10 feet in broad daylight, 3:00 in the afternoon, 8 to 10 feet in broad daylight of a creature that made direct eye contact with them. Think about that for a minute. And there was some telepathic communication. That's incredible. Like, I just watched E.T. with my son, who's 8. And I thought to myself, one of the girls froze in her tracks. Katya, she was 21 years old. The two other girls grabbed each other by the hand and shot out of there. And she was frozen, locked eyes on this thing for an extended moment. That's where the title of the film came from, Moment of Contact, because I asked her, during that moment of contact, when you locked eyes with this creature, did you feel any communication? And that's when she said, help me, I'm scared, I'm weak, I'm suffering, I need help. And I thought, imagine if it played out slightly differently. Maybe if the girls lured the creature into a safe haven. Who knows? There were apparently, according to witnesses, craft later that night flying over the region, which can't, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, it couldn't have been anything else other than a rescue effort.
What do you make of the smell they said the creatures had? It was like ammonia and sulfur, right?
Yeah. They
Do you
said it
think
was
that
so
was
strong. I remember asking people, everybody, the doctor, everybody, even when the creature would be at a certain spot and leave, it would be days. People in their sinuses. They said it, if you've ever had within a certain proximity contact with a skunk, they said a skunk was, this was like 100 times stronger, 1,000 times stronger, paralyzingly strong. And it would get into your nasal cavities. And, I don't know. I actually got contacted by a chemist scientist, and he had a whole breakdown, which I forwarded to some journalists that are actually doing some follow-up research on the Virginia incident. Because look, if Virginia happened the way that all the witnesses are claiming it have happened, we're dealing with a modern day Roswell. And the advantage that we have now is that the vast majority of firsthand eyewitness testimony, these people are still alive. So this is the case. That's like this could be the case that finally proves once and for all that we're not alone. Um, it sounds like a stretch what I'm saying, but just imagine if it really did happen. Of course, I wouldn't have spent 12 years on it if I felt it didn't. But if it did happen, then there's proof, and people are still alive, and the evidence is out there. They didn't destroy those bodies. They're probably in a lab somewhere in the United States. So there are people working behind the scenes on this. I can trust me when I tell you this. There are people working behind the scenes. There was a lot more coming out in this case. I have no doubt in the next few years there'll be more coming out in this case.
I know you said an hour, so I want to ask you, can you talk about your next project? You want to let people know, or are you able to?
Sure. I don't think I've made this announcement anywhere else, but and a huge, incentive for me on this next project. I felt compelled at the end of making the phenomenon when Senator Harry Reid said that what's been released to the general public, and it was on the front page of the New York Times and all the Tic Tac videos and the Go Fast. He said it's the tip of the iceberg on what's the evidence that's sitting somewhere. And then when I went to Virginia to button up that film project, learning that by every military person I spoke with, and then the radar control officer who saw the flight guy, who saw the United States Air Force plane come in and land in Campinas without authorization from the Brazilian government, okay, I feel very strongly that there was U.S. involvement and that they took the bodies and flew them back. Can I prove it? No, I can't. But they flew the bodies back to the United States. And so I want to go walk the halls of Congress. I want to talk to those people that are investigating the phenomenon. There's new legislation that through a process allows people to violate their security oath without fear of prosecution or jail. This is all just happening recently, and find out where this evidence allegedly is and who can release it. And that's basically what my next objective is.
Real quick, James, too. The reason I actually asked the question earlier about how much this phenomenon goes around is I stumbled on a paper that you should probably check out by Leroy P Research. And if a quarter of the crash retrievals and bodies that have happened in these locations like Aztec, repeatedly New Mexico, you may want to have a look at it and just do what you want. But I stumbled on it and I was just like, what is this? And I couldn't believe it because I heard about from Moment of Contact and then Roswell, a couple other, but the amount of crash and supposed bodies that have been retrieved is insane. It talks about William Cooper being a part of. I mean, you may want to check it out. So if you want, I can send you the link to the thing.
That'd be great. When I was making Out of the Blue back in the 90s, late 90s, the guy that I was working with, the building that we were editing the film in, the woman who owned the building found out that we were making a UFO film. Again, this is in the late 90s. This was Out of the Blue. And my partner, this guy, Boris Zuboff, he goes, yeah, what's her name? Willie wants to talk with you, who owns this building. Really? She's like in her late 80s or early 90s. And I said, what, she wants to have tea. I said, well, what she want? I don't know. He goes, she's adamant, wants to talk with you. So I had tea with her and she said, look, I'm not interested in going on camera. I'm not interested in selling my story. I just want you to know that my husband told me in the 50s that a UFO crashed in the desert of New Mexico and that there were bodies recovered. And she said, if that's what he said, you could take that to the bank. My husband was not, she's like, I've known about this since the early 50s. Then when I was investigating Socorro, New Mexico, the 1964 UFO landing with the officer Lonnie Zamora, April 24th, 1964, I came across, and he'll remain nameless, in that region, a gentleman that I absolutely believed, he's not going on the record, he's not selling the story, that he knew some of the ranchers that were still out there from Roswell, that the generational ranchers that had a piece of the debris, and they showed it. He held it in his hands and he described it to me. And so I know I feel extremely confident that there's still evidence in the hands of the civilians, and that their crash retrievals have in fact taken place, as outlandish and crazy as it sounds. Very compelling eyewitness testimony that would sway a jury in any court case beyond a shadow of doubt. And I feel the same with Virginia. And the fact that I know quite well about a couple of cases, why not more? Who knows? Who knows?
Do
I
you ever
just sent
go?
you that link, by the way, on
Do you ever-
Twitter. I
It's
added you, by the
interesting.
way.
Working at the Roswell Daily Record, I still get calls of people that claim they were either around back then when that happened. I've gotten emails of people claiming they have pictures of the bodies and they have actual debris they're going to send to me. So uh, sometime I'd like to just sit you down and just show you the kind of claims that have been made. I know people that claim they know the doctors that performed the autopsies on the aliens. It's working
Let
at the
me,
newspaper that did the reports pretty wild.
you guys, let me tell you something really funny. I was at the 50th anniversary of Roswell, okay, 1997. And I was in my 20s, and I picked up a hitchhiker. And this kid was really quiet in the car. He was probably 20, 22. I was like 28 or something. I don't know, something like that. And I drove him to wherever he was going. And he's like, yeah, I was born and raised here and know all the ranchers, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, cool. He's like, what are you doing here? And I told him. He's like, oh, cool. He's kind of quiet. And then I dropped him off, and he got out of the car, and he opened the door, got out of the car, kept the door open, looked at me, and he goes, there's still pieces of the debris of that thing still in this town. I looked at him, and he's like, and he closed the door and he left. So that those ranchers kept some of that debris, no question, man. And I heard, I think it was Stanton Friedman that said that Mac Brazel's son was boasting in a bar one night about it, and that some men in suits showed up the next day and took whatever he had, But I mean, that's a kind of a slam dunk case, And even though it's super old, from 47, it's still totally relevant,
It
Do you
is.
ever go back and forth on this? Like, I mean, for me, I take a more philosophical approach to the whole thing, but I torment myself all the time, and I try and tamper or dampen down my excitement with things just to try and get at the truth. Like, it's easy to like think or believe this kind of stuff, but like obviously you're doing a lot of research. Do you have your days where you're like, maybe this person's full of shit, or maybe I don't think this or don't think that, or something along those lines?
I like
Yeah,
to
he
look.
thought that about you.
I don't
Yeah,
exist.
I like to look people in the eye, for sure. And I go after the witnesses. They very seldomly, I pick specific cases that I'll go after, and I'm usually, me and a crew are tracking people down, and I look them in the eye. I, I honestly, I could only think of a handful of cases in my 3-decade career where people have reached out to me, and I could tell pretty quickly if they're full of doggy doo doo or not. I use my kind of bullshit sensor. Uh,
You remote view their mind, and
yeah, you can just kind of tell, and particularly if it's a known case. Anyway, but yeah, you'll just be nice and just don't include that person in the story.
yeah, I mean, I was just curious. I think we're all aware of that there's obviously real stuff at play, but then there's stuff that muddies the waters that's not needed. That
I think that's intentional.
yeah, absolutely.
I think that's intentional.
You said you wanted to keep it to an hour. We're just under an hour here. Is there anything, Shane, Toby, do you have any other questions here before we start to wrap it up?
Got a question from the chat, actually. They want your thoughts on what the beings in the craft were doing. Were they being transported, or do you think they were driving it? Was it shot down in your opinion? If so, who
Yeah.
do you feel
So
shot it down?
good question. Good question. Um, you know, we all the eyewitness testimony that we were able to track down, and there were others that we'd seen on camera that were taken in 1996 that we saw their testimony on camera, but were unable to track those particular witnesses down. But the ones that we did track down all said that just like instantly there was a huge gash in the side of this cylindrical shaped unidentified object, and that it had this white vapor, not like smoke from a fire. So it was a white vapor coming out the back of it. So clearly it was damaged. Somehow it was damaged. I mean, what are the odds of it being struck by a meteorite? I think it's far more likely that it was shot at. Personally, can I prove that? Absolutely not. But that's my feeling on it, is that somebody shot at it, and it might have been the United States. But look, I'm not saying that's what happened because I don't know, and I can't prove that. But I can tell you that every witness that saw this thing in trouble said that it had a gash in the side of it.
I have a question myself. The Chuck Clark footage, are we ever going to see it?
There's ongoing efforts for that too. I could go into. I mean, that's a long story. God.
I hate to bring it up, but since I first heard you
Oh,
talk
it
about
frustrates
it,
the hell out of me because I saw it.
were those screenshots that were posted to Twitter, they made like a GIF out of it, were those actually from the video?
So there are a couple of legitimate screenshots floating around from one of the people who went out and saw the footage. I won't say who that person was, but he was given screenshots. And all I can say is that the Carlos Diaz of that light object is very similar to what I saw. It looked like the skin of this thing was alive, like it was like phosphorus or something. I remember when I saw it, I realized some of the witnesses that I'd met over the years why they were at a lack of trying to find a word in the English language to describe. It's so foreign, it's so alien, excuse the pun, from anything that you've seen that you just go, okay, now I see what they were talking about. It's like the craft was alive and glowing. Every molecule of it was glowing. And the way it hovered was almost like a like a ship on the ocean in not really rough waters, but kind of like this, not stable. Do you know what I mean? Kind of doing this. And and I was feeling the exact same thing as the cameraman was thinking was, oh my God, like, oh my God. And that's what he said. Oh my God. Just like that. The camera shut off. But that's what I was thinking. Honestly, I think that if I was the cameraman, I think he could have hit it with a rock pretty easily. That's how close it was. It was the most phenomenal footage I've ever seen in my life. And Chuck still has it. That's a fact. I have people that saw it last year. It's degraded because it was VHS tape. The guy who, sorry, I don't think he shot it, but the guy who had it, I think it was a Beta SP master who made a VHS copy for Chuck Clark. We got his name and we went after him, and he had just died. And he worked at a production facility in Los Angeles. It was like, we missed him by a couple of months. It was so depressing. And I felt this overwhelming sense of urgency when we got back in touch. Not me, because Chuck won't talk to me, but the people that I put out to get in touch with him. I felt a sense of urgency and actually put George Knapp on the case. And George Knapp was like really busy, and I kept pushing him. And George's like, I know him. I did a story on him in the 90s. His place got raided by the feds. I know this guy. And I said, George, you got to get out there, man. I've seen this footage. It's phenomenal. It's the best footage in the history of ever. It's the holy grail of footage. Obviously the tape's been degraded in VHS, and you know what VHS does after 25 years. But the guy that had it on a master on Beta SP, he's dead. We contacted his son. He didn't get back to us. We contacted the production place where he worked. They didn't know anything. And it was just like, you know? So yeah, but Chuck still has that tape. That's right, I said it. Chuck still has that tape, and he showed it to a couple of people I know last year.
So he's still not talking to you because you kept pushing him?
And he even said to the people that went to his house, yeah, James Fox, I told James if he asked me again, I wouldn't talk to him. And I haven't talked to him. And so, yeah.
Man, that's
I mean,
just to be able to see that sounds amazing.
It was amazing. I saw it in the 90s, and honestly, I thought it was going to come out. I never thought that it would never be really, what,
Oh, like, somebody's got it. You know it.
How selfish it was of Chuck Clark.
It's in that Indiana Jones warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
The rumor keeps
circulating that I'm talking about it. I didn't care anymore. I was like, you know what? Sorry, Chuck, but you're selfish. And it's one thing. It's like, look, I said to him at the time, I was like, look, I get it. You can't give the tape to me. You made a promise to them. That's fair enough. Put me in touch with the guys that shot it and let me at least talk to them. And he wouldn't do it. So frustrating. Anyway, that's another topic.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is awesome. Obviously, we would love to have you back on again in the future. And again, you're also welcome on the other podcast, Mind Escape. And yeah, just a huge fan of your work. I think you're a very good filmmaker, and it's definitely inspiring. And yeah, let's get more filmmakers doing stuff on this topic.
So everybody that doesn't have tickets yet, UFO Expo, you can come hang out with James in person.
Oh, that's right.
Be there too.
Roswell UFO Expo, March 10th through 12th. Yep, March 10th through 12th, and tickets are available. Shane also has something he wants to add here before we wrap it up.
Well, I was first say thanks for coming. And I remember when I met you, I was sitting down having coffee with Chrissy Newton, Micah Hanks, and you came and told us about the other stuff that you couldn't, about the video, right? And I was just like, oh, this is pretty freaking awesome, right? So thank you again. But I just wanted to say, guys, if you've had an experience, if you're struggling, check out the opusnetwork.org. They have mental health professionals that do take this subject seriously, as well as check out UAP Medical Coalition. That's what I'm a part of. We're trying to reach out to doctors and mental health professionals to let them know this subject happens. It really, you need to take it seriously because not everybody needs medication. And Wounded Warrior, they saved my life. So donate, check them out, guys. Thank you. And thank you, James.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely. We have the links all for that stuff down below. If you want to support the Roswell UFO Symposium, we have the Linktree link down below. You can follow us on all the social media apps, especially Twitter, which we are very, very active on. And yeah, if you want to support Mind Escape, my other podcast, I do. Shane's a producer there, and Toby's a regular guest. Check out Mind Escape. You know, it's a philosophy podcast that's dedicated to exploring the mysteries of life. We are also going to be premiering our first documentary, As Within, So Without, at the Roswell UFO Expo, March 10th through 12th. And I am going to play the trailer as we get out of here. But again, thank you so much to James Fox. Please check out Moment of Contact. I have the link down below. Please check out The Phenomenon if you have not already. Best documentary, hands down, in my opinion. And I'm very, very critical of this kind of stuff, if anybody knows.
Thank you, family, for showing up and watching and chatting with us.
Thank you, everybody.
Real quick, 1 second message. Deb says she's been bugging James about the autopsy, and that's all I have to say.
All right. Well, we love everybody. Stay safe out there. And I'm going to play the trailer as we get out of here. And thank you so much again. Peace and love.
Bye.
Is it real or is it not? That's what you're asking me.
I still, to this day, can't find any rational explanation for what I saw.
Extremely intelligent, apparently highly advanced, hyper-technological being.
I think that we just don't look at the perception of reality in the right way yet.
It got very close to the point that I could see just one big light, and then it stopped, and then it shot up in the sky.
You know you're not dreaming, but you wonder how real any of it really is.
It dawned on me, it was real. This took place, but then I still didn't do anything with it. Never said anything to anybody.
There is some mind-altering aspect to these UFO encounters. A lot of people get a sense of missing time.
I noticed that these three stars were kind of in a formation. It was a triangular formation.
Condensed into entities or beings that you interact with who are sentient.
The chemicals which are going into our brain are making the unconscious archetypes come alive.
How things evolve from pure energy to matter.
Definitely was kind of a paradigm shifting moment.
And as we continue to evolve in our own consciousness, we will perceive of new modes of interpretation, but that may be dependent upon how this supposed phenomenon reveals itself to us.
I'm not sure why we discredit the human experience when it's not in alignment with our current belief system.
It's important to consider that, one, we don't really understand what our minds do under the influence of psychedelics.
They all attest to the reality of some other realm. You call it the paranormal, doesn't matter what you call it, spiritual realm, supernatural, metaphysical, doesn't matter.
The fact that we're essentially vibrating energy in a sense, and that when this experience is over, that particular energy transforms and doesn't die because it can't die, fills me with a lot of comfort that there is something else after this so-called here and now.
They show you how much of your reality is subjective and fragile and capable of being influenced by a psychedelic drug.
Coming from a scientific background, you come up with explanations that range from geomagnetic to atmospheric to something that's physical in nature.
There's a lot more out there that we don't know than we do know.
So the entire system, the human body, is effectively a stimulation response machine.
I think something's here. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it's from. It could be extraterrestrials.
Until it made a full rotation and then it just hit an insane speed and just shot up straight into the atmosphere.
I think that there's compelling evidence that psychedelics have played a significant role in human evolution over a long period of time.
Our view of reality, the reality that we experience on a day-to-day basis, seems to be this very, very thin slice of something far larger and far more complex. For reasons that we're never clear about. Never said anything.
But I don't seem to have a message.
As within, so without. From UFOs to DMT.